Got it. That's fine.
I always have a lot too.
All right. So Jeremy, how does the mine show up and then yours show up? Oh, how does technology work? So Jeremy, been a long time dojoer. How long have I known you? 10 years? At least. Through Dojo4, which we were talking about earlier, and you've done many other things that Aero will tell me about. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so he's been around for quite a while in town, community member, and you're probably going to speak at Mountain Ruby.
I haven't even thought of it.
Now you have.
Found out it was being with the dates today. There may be a chance I'll submit a talk and see if it gets accepted. But you're all also local folks, and you should submit talks to the conference.
That's right.
Yeah,
And it's okay if you redo a talk you've done here.
This is a good place to practice it, by the way.
it is a good place to practice it for sure. And so we already talked about what Dojo4 is. Jeremy is great. Got me delicious bread from a bread share 2-3 weeks ago. Talk to him about that if you want. Very good bread. Yeah, now pitching Michael's
bread.
That's
fine.
We pitch everything here.
Yeah, it's open community thing. But you're going to talk about Bridgetown, which is static site website builder. So let's kick that off, and I will go back to Zoom. Okay, that's
All right. Chris, Marty, can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about Bridgetown today, which is sort of my, I got into it recently for a couple of work projects, and I was like, hey, there's some good stuff here. I think it's a useful thing to know. So pardon my cough. So a little bit, who am I? Rylan did a little bit of an intro there, but this will date me right here, if anyone knows what that is. So, but yeah, old school Unix head a lot of the times. And you can find me at copious free time on all the socials, mostly GitHub and ruby.social and some Instagram here and there. So say hi, all that kind of good stuff. But what we're going to talk about today, actually, a little bit of my history. I've been doing this for a while, and most of what the work I end up doing is sort of this. I take really crappy stuff that makes you angry and turn it into stuff that's still crap but makes you happy. So a lot of the times it's file conversions, data pipelines, all sorts of interesting different things. A lot of code generation and static website type stuff. So these are a couple of real life situations I've done where I've converted ugly crap to happy crap. One of them was way back in the day. I worked at IBM, and we had some, what would these days be called pretty standard CRUD based applications that you could probably whip out in an afternoon or at least no more than a week in, say, Rails. Well, when you're doing with Java servlets and enterprise Java beans, there's a lot more overhead, a lot of ceremony. And actually, I tried to find the book that I used a lot of this with. It's called Code Generation in Action from Manning. It's like 2003 or 4, somewhere in that range. But it actually uses Ruby to generate Java code, and I used Ruby scripts and generated entire Java applications based on a config file. It was fun. Yeah, I got most of my work done in the morning, so that was kind of cool. Another big one was also at IBM, and this one is just another reason for knowing static site generation and stuff is when you've got stuff that doesn't change very often. I mean, if it costs less to regenerate 200 gigabytes of static HTML files and it takes you an hour and you can do that once a day and you can serve it up with an Apache web server versus, have a whole web sphere and a whole, at that time, Java application server or something. But hey, if you can host something on S3 or Netflix versus Heroku, go for it. Netflix, Netlify. Hosting something on Netflix,
that'd be cool.
Hosting something on Netflix would be even better. And then for many years, I've done data pipelines, and a big one was we processed probably between 10 and 50% of the Twitter feed. as CSV files and just did a whole bunch of social media analytics. But basically it was take JSON files, convert them to CSV, convert them to CSV, convert them to CSV, dump them into a database of some type. And so, it's converting crap into other crap. But you're all here to understand about Bridgetown. This is the closest emoji thing I could find to Bridgetown. So I think it worked out pretty well. So what is Bridgetown? According to their website, Bridgetown is a next generation progressive site generator and full stack framework. How many of you have all used static site generation of any type? Vim counts, editor counts, yeah. So it's great. You've got, I just basically need to have some code, generate a static site, push it out to S3. I'm going to say Netflix all evening, so Netlify. It's great stuff, your personal blogs, all those good things. I also consider, and actually Bridgetown does a little bit, considers it sort of the spiritual successor to Jekyll, which is sort of the classic static site generator, or most well-known one from the Ruby world, because Jekyll was written initially by Tom Preston Warner of GitHub, and it is what GitHub Pages was originally, was a big Jekyll system. But there's also been a lot of other really good Ruby static site generators. Middleman, people still use Middleman quite a lot. I've enjoyed it quite a lot. WebGen, still actively used. These are all still actively used and developed. There's one called Nanoc, or NanoC. And Webby is no longer in active development, but I had to put it up here because this was done by Tim Pease, local Rubyist, worked on it and made it for a number of years, and then a lot of other stuff. Like it was pre-NanoC and WebGen and stuff all came later than Webby. So, but you should check it out. It's some really good code to read. So the big ones is, why am I excited about Bridgetown? And these are the big ones. It is built from the ground up for extensibility. It's got hooks and a whole library and an API and all this sort of stuff when you want to build stuff using Bridgetown. It's very well documented, which for me is probably one of the biggest things for any project. The documentation, which if it was a static site generator and it didn't have really good statically generated documentation, I think that might have been a problem. And the other big one is it embraces the whole web stack. So Bridgetown, out of the box, works with whatever JavaScript front-end tools you're using. They're like Rhapsody, ESBuild, Webpack, all of those good things are all part of it. So let's start with making a site. And actually, I do need my, I needed my, I was planning on using my presenter notes, but that's not going to happen here. So this is the big one. So create an initial site, gem exec bridge to new. Anyone notice anything weird about this command?
Gem exec.
Gem exec. Yeah.
So you've highlighted the weird part.
Well, that's actually not me highlighting the part. That's Reveal.js saying that this is a shell program and exec is a keyword. But so the big one here is bridge to new, just like any Rails site or Rails or Ruby program. You build a new site. There's always a new, and in this case, we're going to build it using ERB as our template generator. But the key thing here is gem exec, which I just learned about when working on this talk. And yeah, so we're going to diverge for a moment.
I'll just stop here a second. Do you want to send me your notes and I could turn this around? Would that be helpful?
Actually, yeah, we can do this. No, you don't need to see my notes. I can just point you at the website. Oh, actually, you just hit. Oh no, you're looking at.
I'm looking at it.
See, you're going to go to
Chrome.
Oh, now you're displaying.
Okay. No, that wouldn't work.
Because you have Zoom. Yeah.
All right, so
I don't think you can do it.
If I could use my.
hang on a second. Can Ryan look at it? Yeah, just because I know how nice notes can be when you're in the middle. I'll still try to slice this part out when I edit the video.
You edit the videos?
Occasionally.
You know what?
One time,
Don't worry about it.
Kevin showed some sensitive issues.
Yes, whoops.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. I'll be okay. I mean, this is what would happen with my speaker view. I could do that. I'll just do that for the other ones. So this is the important bit. This is rubygems 3.4.8, which was released last month. And this is a new command as of last month. And well, if anyone uses Node, it's very similar to npx, that type of thing. It basically will execute a command from a gem of the same name, of the same command by default. Otherwise, there's commands. You can say this gem, this command, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's great. And it makes things a lot of, especially site generators or Rails. And actually, that's their example for the documentation for gem exec, is you can do gem exec Rails new, and you can generate a new Rails app. It does require rubygems 3.4.8, but that's the only thing. If you're up to date on rubygems, then it should work just fine. So this is the cool thing I learned along with this. So the first thing we're gonna do is, I'm not gonna do this one because I've already got a Git repo with this done in it. So I thought about trying to use lazy Git real quick and see if I could navigate it with it. But Bridgetown new, this will generate lots of output. It basically does a whole code generation, creates a directory, Git repo, node setup, does a node install, bundle install, git commit, that whole thing. And then cd to your example site, and you do Bridgetown start. And we're going to do the last bit there, which is this one. Here we go. Bridgetown start. Oh, no. Because I'm running Bridgetown locally, also can't have the yeah, I killed it in the wrong process.
What's the WW do?
Wide. It's
1W is like 80 columns, and
yeah,
2W or 120 or something, and 2 is as wide as it needs to be.
yeah.
That's how you can identify an old Unix hacker.
If they've done 3 Ws.
They've done more than one.
Oh, okay. Oh, apparently I have it running somewhere. Oh, I just killed my presentation. That's what I did.
I wondered if you might have.
All right, we'll just go back over here and start the presentation again. And then we'll go over here. And by the way, this presentation is also a Bridgetown site, so using Reveal.js. So then we're over here and start the sample site. Pardon me, that's my alert to take out the trash. So
It's gonna have to wait.
it's gonna have to wait until I get home. Yeah.
Is that a metaphor for?
Yeah. So localhost 4001, and there's your sample Bridgetown site right off the bat. But that's out of the box, and it's kind of good. You've got home, about, there's a sample post, all this kind of good stuff. I mean, that's out of the box. It works. All the good stuff. Well, what we're going to do now is look at the folder layout. I've trimmed out some different things, but the basic folder layout, you've got a config directory, front end. This is basically the front end directory is managed by whatever your, Webpack or ES build or something like that. That's that system purely. So whatever's in there, the Bridgetown Ruby side doesn't care about it all. It's 100% your front end code.
But it gives you one out of the box, right?
It gives it to you out of the box, and actually you'll notice right here, there's a little process manager, and this front end is basically yarn run ES build, and there you go. And it doesn't do anything. All it does is run that command for that side. You have, we're not going to talk about this bit here, but there's some fun. It actually has some experimental stuff with actually being a web application stack. It includes Rhoda under the covers, and if you want to do some dynamic routes and stuff like that, but not part of this talk, but it's definitely stuff to look into. Source is where everything exists. They have components, data, layouts, posts, images, and I'll get into sort of what all these different things are. If you're using, say, Middleman, this is very similar to your source, SOURCE directory, or Jekyll, those types of things. This is sort of the input data and files that are going to be part of your output. Output, where's the generated site goes. Plugins is for new source code that you're going to use as part of your build. Top level config, Puma config, the front end, ES build, your gem file, your rake, and your packages. So that's all of the things there. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if you want. So there's a lot of different things of adding stuff to a Bridgetown project. It's got a lot of packages and helpers that are already built, and you're able to do things. One of them is adding Turbo, as in the Turbo web front end that's part of, or wrapper that's part of a lot of Rails things. And that one is over here. We're just going to do adding Turbo. And so this is what that did. It basically, actually, I think that's my next slide. Yeah, oh no, it's not. We'll get back to that in a minute. But it basically added some data to the JavaScript index, and then added a whole file here, transitions that gets used, and updated your package.json with Hotwire Turbo, and then of course the yarn.lock file. So, but that was basically a bundled configuration, which is where Bridgetown knows exactly how it wants to do it, and this is a built-in config. And there's a whole bunch of built-in configurations that Bridgetown already shows. And actually, if you just do Bridgetown configure, this is all the out-of-the-box configurations it knows how to do things with. Some of them are deployment locations, some of them are add-ons. Most of them are actually like Shoelace and Stimulus and Tailwind, those are all front-end things that can add to it.
So when you add Turbo to a static website, it's just going to swap the site when you navigate to About instead?
Yeah, so what Turbo is going to do under the covers, it's going to install the JavaScript. Turbo is JavaScript. Yeah. That's all it is. Yeah. So basically, it just basically loads that NPM package in, and your front end header, where the JavaScript gets linked in from your website, is going to have the Turbo in it, and so it hijacks your body, just like it does in a Rails app.
So then in the static situation, your About page would not have the header and footer or whatever?
No. It all still has it. Turbo takes care of doing all that stuff. Okay. So basically, when you make a new request, it'll go and fetch the whole thing, parse it for the body, and swap it out. Huh. I think that's how it does it under the covers.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was...
It doesn't have Turbo streams, but you can do streams with some of the Rhoda stuff under the covers and things like that.
Yeah, just in the context of a static.
Yeah, it does it the same way it does it in Rails and that kind of stuff. Because it's the top level Turbo. It's not Turbo frames. It's not Turbo streams. It's the top level Turbo that's been around forever. Cool. Another one is a plugin, and this one is we're not going to show you this one, but what this one is a gem that's called Bridgetown Quick Search, and it basically adds in the ability to do insight full text search using Lunar.js, LUNR, which has to do with basically it's browser side full text search. It's a JavaScript thing that plugs in. You generate a big JSON file in the back end, save it on here as a static, and then your front end will use that. It's basically your entire site already indexed in JavaScript in JSON format, and then you can do type ahead, all sorts of stuff like that. It's sort of an example of Bridgetown.
It's like really good for like documentation.
Right here, I want to look at, that's quick search. So that's sort of what that stuff does. But to do it, it adds a whole Ruby gem called Bridgetown Quick Search. And then this is how you set it up. You add in this init to the initializers for Bridgetown, which is like many Rails stacks or any other things. There's always a config initializers when it boots up. And then it adds this as an import in your JavaScript. And then you basically have a little snippet of ERB code that you would want to put in your project anywhere, like wherever you want that search box to do. And you just put in, there's like a helper that has one line and you put it in there and then you can style it appropriately. There's other configuration items you can add to this init or as part of this JavaScript that can actually style it for you. So that's all in the documentation for it.
And then does it build the index as
Yes.
part of the site build?
That's one of the great things about it is because that index is basically a static file. And the way it works with as a plugin, because Bridgetown has all of these hooks for part of the whole life cycle of the site building, it has a hook that says, hey, at this point in the life cycle, loop over all the pages that the whole site knows about, grip all the text out, give me the page, the title, the body, all that kind of good stuff, dump it into a JSON file, and save it in the output directory.
And they're just fuzzy searches that JSON.
And then the front end, the client on the front end, there's the Lunar.js plugin, which gets added to your JavaScript pack. It just loads it up and then does a client on the front end. It's not the best thing in the world out of the box, but it totally works for like 80% of the rules. And you don't have to have a backend server or anything to do it. And for a static website, it's amazing. And then the last one is something called a automation. And this is one where it's a different way of applying something. This is sort of like it's going to run a script on your repo and edit files. And this is how you would apply Tailwind in this case. We're going to do, that's quick search, apply Tailwind. Yeah. So applying Tailwind, applying Tailwind basically is going to, this is basically going to, it adds some stuff to your rake file and updates your, well, I did some other stuff in here too. That's an old JavaScript thing. Updates your post CSS config. This is the big one, why it's an automation instead of one of the others, because it like alerts you. It's like, I'm going to replace this file. And then creates a Tailwind config, which is needed for Tailwind, and then updates yarn and all that good stuff. But now, if we go back here and reload that one, wow, it really didn't like, there we go. Killed the right one this time.
Did you just run the Tailwind or?
No, I basically, because I had a lot of diffs and Bridgetown automatically reloads itself. It was basically a situation where reloading itself is a problem,
Because you checked out.
because I checked out a new bit of the repo and it's like code that doesn't reload. But if we hit this now, basically I didn't change any of the content. I basically just changed what was getting loaded there.
So you have Turbo and Tailwind now?
I have Turbo and Tailwind in there. And so now it's different because like the CSS has changed and stuff like that, but I haven't changed any of the content. And then sort of like, hey, you know what? We want to make this actually look like look better than that. So what we're going to do now is try to move that title bar out of the way from Zoom. How do you move that thing away? There we are. Move down to the bottom so I can hit this.
It uses AI to be always where you want to be.
Exactly. So we're going to go here and do the copy and paste montage.
Someone needs to hum the theme for Rocky or something right now.
Yeah. And so, Yeah, this is, I decided to work on a static website as a demo. So we're gonna see what happens here. And I'm on the wrong one. Oh, well.
Different branch.
I tagged it. Oh, there it is. I did the wrong. Convert the layout to Tailwind. There we go. There we go. That was converted. And I didn't change any data on this one. This is just changing the CSS and the files and stuff like that. But we've got a couple different things, you know, it looks way better to start with. But the thing is now we actually need data. This is where we're going to talk with, this is a data-backed website. And what we want to look at is source_data. So inside Bridgetown, there's all these different things which are called collections. And there's the top one, there's three basic ones. One is posts, data, and pages. And those are by default, those are by default three top level given collections, but we also have something called data, which is basically data for your website that you can do whatever you want with. And basically it's a file that's in source_data. And it can be a JSON file, which can be an array or an object. It can be a YAML file, which basically has one top level document that can be an array or a set of hash. It can be a CSV file that has a header row, or it can just be a Ruby file that gets evaluated. And the file in here, these all get evaluated, and that conglomerated data is available to your site as you're generating the thing. There's a top level variable called site, which is available throughout your entire application while it's running, and site.data is all of these. Each one of these is a different file name. And so this is sort of an example of what it looks like. You have source data, and we'll go over here and do we'll add 06, which is going to add the data. And this is another really good thing that Bridgetown has is a console. So just like you have Rails console, you have Bridgetown console. So you can have access to, let's make that bigger for folks. So there we go, site.data dot speaker. Oh, actually, if I just do site.data dot keys, locations, meetings, people, site metadata, and talks. And if we look over here under that's each one of these is a YAML file. So people, you know, there we go. Hey, Rylan. So there's some data for Rylan, and then that is also available right here. I can say site.data.people Rylan. And that's available inside the actual Ruby application that we're running here, which is great because inside, you know, a static site, you're going to need all this kind of stuff. So if anyone's, how many of you have used like Middleman or Jekyll? Right. 3 or 4 of you. So we'll get into the fun bits here, but I like Bridgetown console, which is really good. So you basically have the entire static generator as a console, and you can do all of the things you would want to do inside, like your pages and stuff like that, pretty straightforwardly. So then we have what's called a basic resource. So if you've used WebGen, or not WebGen, if Middleman, or where's my notes here? I need to get to my speaker notes. Yeah, okay, then that's where we are. The basic resources is one input file ends up being one URL, so /about and /about.md or something like that, and your source directory ends up being your site /about, that kind of thing. And one resource is basically front matter plus a templatized content. So most of these files, you're going to be like .md or .html, but the top bit will be a YAML document. I'm going to bring one up here in a moment to show you. And then the bottom bit will be like the content of the page that needs to get rendered. And generally each one of these also has a top level layout like you would with the Rails app that you can assign in the front matter. And then the internal Bridgetown pipeline converts each one of those files to an output resource. And by an output resource, we mean URL, Universal Resource Locator. So that's what the term resource is. So we'll look at one of these real quick. Source, say, the fun part is Bridgetown is good about, it's like, here's the about. So this is that's the about page, and this is front matter at the top. It's a little YAML document delimited by the triple dashes. Its title is about, and then this is the content, and this is a markdown file. So Bridgetown knows, hey, I need to convert this one to a markdown. I take it from markdown, convert it to HTML, run it through an ERB template, and go from there. Another one would be like index. Like here's the Bridgetown website, and let's actually do convert this to the Ruby one and say, oh, there you go. So that's the new about page as a Ruby user group. And these bits, like here's a title, and that was the about page, or actually index. And this one is an HTML. So it knows that this is an HTML file that needs to have, and it's an ERB template, because that's what we said at the beginning. We did -- template ERB. So by default, each one of these is converted to an ERB template. And you can see, here's the ERB stuff. There's site metadata. So we have the file under data, site metadata, which is this is YAML information that's available through the entire site of YouTube, Twitter, GitHub, and then we can pull that into our target here. And then say, for instance, let's see. Like the presenting page from the old website is just some text. And so, hey, this one is a markdown file that then just needs to be converted to HTML. And this is where you can set layouts. So you can say, hey, this file is actually the prose layout. And the prose layout is, there's all these layouts in here. And prose is just an ERB template and basically wrap. This is the same way you would have layouts in Rails. But because we're using Tailwind, it needs like a wrapper around it because it's a prose. We're not doing much markup. But this layout also has a layout of default. So basically, this markdown file gets wrapped in this layout, and then this layout gets wrapped in the default one, which is the full page. So it's kind of cool that way. You got a question there?
What does the top level in the YAML do?
So that is my next slide.
Okay. What's your next slide?
My next slide is about, so each one of these top level resources is available throughout the entire site on its own. So if we look at Bridgetown console, these are all available as site.collections. These are pages. So this is every page that's in the website, except that one is not there yet.
Can you host this site like a GitHub page?
Yeah, totally. When this is all done, you just run Bridgetown Bridgetown build, and it creates the entire static website in the output directory.
Even though it has like dynamic things.
Well, this isn't dynamic. This is just part of like your development and stuff right here. This part is all dynamic for building the website and like debugging and figuring stuff out. No, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But basically, the big one here is each one of these pages has metadata, and it's a physical object in the Bridgetown system. And the next bit you want to do is we want to say, hey, let's use some of that. All of those resources, which are those individual pages, are part of a collection. Each one is in an individual collection. So if you want to make your own new collection, like, you know, some other collection of pages, there's posts and pages. If you basically, it's a directory structure. In that source directory, if you have source/_thing, then you would have the thing collection. Like everything that was under that directory would be in the thing collection. And anything that's at the top level is a page. And all the front matter data is in that resource object. So if we go back here to resources.first. First, okay, so this is the 404 page, you know. And we could say data, that's the 404 page, and that's the metadata about the 404 page. If we do, say, what's the second one here? Oh yeah, let's go back to the second one. That's the index page. Okay, so it's data, and we can see, hey, layout, title, top level true, categories, tags, locale, slug, template engine, and date. And this is where I wanted to go with. So that top level is available as data on this resource. And we can use that in something else. So say we wanted to make a top level header for navigation or something, but we only wanted some pages to be directly linked from there. So that's what I did here, is I made a top level metadata item on all the top level pages. And so when we do that, we have about and presenting up here, because I've put top level as a key in each one of those. And this right here is what's also called a component in Bridgetown. So Bridgetown has components, partials, all sorts of things, like different ways of isolating units of work. And a component is, usually it's component, my next slide. Yeah, no, components are a way of combining data in Bridgetown into combining metadata from your site and like a template. So like this header one here, we want the layout. I'm basically saying, hey, render the header with this site and this page. And this basically under the cover says, I want the header component, create a new instance of it and render it. And that right there is going to be that pill at the top of the website. So if we look at this under the covers, it's a component. There's an RV file, which is the object. And it basically says, hey, I initialize this with two items, and you can decide what you want. We called it with these things, and that was when we invoked it. And all I'm doing here is saying, hey, I want to look at all of the collections. I want the pages collection, and I want all of the resources from it. And I only want to select the ones that have a top level of true in it. So this is going to loop over every page of the website, find all the ones that have top level true, and then I want to sort them so that they're always shows up in the same order every time. And now there's a similar template that comes with it that automatically gets basically your standard ERB template. And down here, this is all Tailwind, so ignore most of it. I copied and pasted almost all of this, except for that, and then inserted this. And we've got, hey, this top level resources ordered is available in this template because it's the template that goes with the component. Does that make sense?
It's like a locals type of.
It's basically invoking
Yeah, the actual method.
that actual function, that actual method.
So it's just available.
Yeah, so the ERB template, in terms of its binding, is bound to an instance of this from a Ruby binding perspective. So you can make components to do all sorts of stuff. And in fact, they have the ability to use the actual GitHub View components as part of Bridgetown if you want. There's a whole plugin to sort of use that. But what this gives us is we've now got this component, and it allows us to dynamically figure out if I make another page that has a top level of true in it, then it'll just automatically show up at the top level of the pill when you're done. And then you also have regular things like partials that everyone is used to from a Rails perspective. And then we've got partials too. So you can do whichever one is appropriate based on the way you think about the problem or how you want to organize things.
Why would you choose one versus the other?
I think it's a lot of preference. I think preference. Well, actually, the one they generate has a component and a partial. So
I guess the components could have more logic in them.
yeah, components can have more logic. And the one thing I didn't like about this is basically I'm duplicating the logic here, but I would also basically have to make, if I was to componentize the footer or this bit of the footer, I would probably componentize this bit, which is basically the collection of resources that's the links, and abstract it out a little bit more, and then maybe use it the same one in both with a different slot type situation. Basically, in this case, it was time. I was like, I'm just going to do one of them.
It's good for demos.
It's good for demos too. So you've got both. And I think there's a usefulness for both of them. This one is just like, hey, I just want this snippet that needs to go somewhere and be done with it. And it works out pretty well.
It's almost like the components are like a presenter sort of logic.
Yeah, especially if you've got more complicated needs for how things are going to do. And the other one is, those components could actually be React components. Could be, you could, as part of the way Bridgetown works, if there's JSX files or .json files in that underscore components directory, it gets automatically put into the JavaScript pack and gets loaded up.
What is it used for compilation?
Whatever you Webpack or ES build, whatever one you pick.
Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna pick.
Yeah.
Is that one picked? Have you done setup for that?
It's in there by default.
Okay.
I think it's right here. Front end. Oh no, not source. Front end JavaScript index, right there. That's out of the box. It does that. This is all done with, I think, a post CSS thing that says, hey, if this slug is Bridgetown components, then actually map that to the source underscore components directory and then load it up. So
I don't know how people have time to do all this stuff.
yeah,
There's a lot in there.
there's a lot in there, but the fun part is like it's all good. So in this case, wait, there's this one. Yeah, so this is one where say you want to use an entire set. We had all that data, so we wanted to we want that data to be available in our metadata for a particular page. So say I've got this file here, which is the sponsors.html file for the Boulder Ruby Users Group website, but all of the data for the sponsors is in this, not in this one because I need to check out the right branch. All right. Now there's this sponsors YAML file, which has got all of the sponsors for Boulder Ruby over the years. It's all extracted from that top level HTML file. But we want to say, hey, I want to make the sponsors page. So I basically want to make a page for sponsors. And I want the sponsors to all be available in the page. So say this file right here, which we'll just now look at, is this. And what this says is, hey, I want to make the variable sponsors available in this template, which is actually site.data.sponsors. And now we've got also top level true here. And so this is now the page, and now we can say data.sponsors. And data inside the template is basically the metadata up here. Oh, and actually I should make this like that. Except that's gonna blow up my next Git checkout. And this is now available. And because it was top level, it's now sponsors, and you've got this page right here. And the fun part is, and the sponsors, because that's now filtered by all the ones that are labeled as active. If we wanted to, we could say, I want to make, here's a good, which one do you, what's your preference here?
So you want to come back?
Sage?
Yeah, Sage Digital. They were a 1 month sponsor.
All right. True. Let me go back over here. Oh, look, Sage Digital is now one of our sponsors. So, and that's using one of those data blobs inside a page and make it available for it, which is really nice to use.
So when you do it that way, that makes the data.sponsors available. Can you use the site? Is that just a shorthand? Could you use site.data?
Yeah, you could do it. You could just do site. You could, because site is always available in a template, you could do site.data.sponsors.each. And so you could do it that way.
If you wanted it to be ugly.
Yeah. And there's other reasons to do it for other things. Like, I'm not getting into prototype pages and stuff like that, where it actually is more important that you do it in the metadata. But that's one of the things you can do there. But here's an interesting bit, is a resource, which is one of those actual pages that's on disk, one of those files on disk, is not a data item. So the resource for a particular sponsor is not a resource. So it's not actually going to generate a page per sponsor, but it is one of those items in that data directory, which is one of the things that I didn't actually realize until I was doing this. And that's sort of a problem, but this is where we get into some fun code. We have the site.collections.pages. So this would be like the about page, the index page, the speakers page, all that kind of stuff. That is the pages is a Bridgetown collection, and the first one is an actual resource class. But those items that are data is basically a data structure. It's a hash with .access. And so what we want to do is we want to make a page for every meeting for the Boulder Ruby users group. We have them, this is what I just said, all this data we have, but they're not resources, they're data. And we want to have a resource for each meeting, so each meeting has its own output page. So you could go Boulder Ruby /meeting/2023-04-12, and it would bring up the page for this meeting. So let's create a resource for every meeting data item. And this is when we get into writing a little bit of a plugin and that's the next one. So. And the way this is done is there's this plugins directory here. And in here is all source code that wires into the entire, wires into the Bridgetown hook system, like all of its hooks and its callbacks and all that kind of different stuff. And this is like just one that's fully documented on the website. I'm doing here is basically tweaking straight from the documentation from the Bridgetown website. And what we want to do is you have what's called a site builder class that you inherit from, and that's actually created for, this is part of your, it's a Bridgetown builder, which is a builder object of something that hooks into the lifecycle. When you generate your site, it creates a site builder class for you. This is one of the ones that's generated as your base class for you in case you want to add like top level methods that everyone can use and that kind of stuff. And the big thing here is that every builder just has a build function. And it does things. These are the hooks. So I'm saying, hey, when you call this build function, hook into the site post read event. And this is all documented. There's a whole list of all the events that you can hook into. The one we want is we want to convert all of the data items to particular resources. And the data section is not loaded until later in the life cycle. So we need to wait until all of the data is loaded from the website or from disks. And once post read has happened, which is reading all of the data in, we want to add meeting resources. And I just pulled this out into a separate function. And so we want to make a new collection called meetings. And the fun part about collections in Bridgetown is you can tell it how it should be sorted by one of the subfields in the collection. So I'm basically saying I want to create a collection. I want to call it meetings. Output is true, which means it's going to create a file in the output directory for it. So you can have collections that are not output. Totally happens. And I say I want it to be output, and I want it to be sorted by the date field. I'm just logging here. And then I'm adding this collection to the site. And then we've already seen site.data.meetings. And now we just want to loop over each one of those. So this is going to loop over this file, key for the meeting, what its title was, the talks that were in it, you know, this type of stuff. And I pulled this out of the file you had. And so this is all of the different things. And like, hey, we've got a special one here for the holiday one in December. It's got a separate description versus our sort of default description, that kind of thing. And so what we want to do is loop over each one of those things. And the function we're looking for here is add resource. And so this is part of the internal Bridgetown API. We're saying I want to add a resource to the collection name, which in this case is meetings. And I want the resource name to be meeting.date.md. So this says, I want this to basically be as if I had written a file in the source directory, meeting subdirectory with 2023-04-12.md. This is sort of fakes that out. And then all of the stuff in here is what would be the top level metadata. And this right here is a helper that Bridgetown says, this triple underscore says, hey, if this is a hash, just inject all of the keys and values in here as if they were. So instead of having to go top level, false, you know, all that type of stuff, it basically says everything that's in this hash, make it part of the metadata. So it's basically going to say there's going to be an ID, a date, a title, and a talks key in the metadata for each one of these resources.
So it's like a front matter helper to expand out, like in the splat operator?
This is basically splatting all the keys of the meeting into the front matter of the resource that you're dynamically creating here. And when I found this, I was like, oh, this is just cool. And then I'm adding in specifically some other ones, like I'm telling it its layout is meeting.
Because you have to.
Because it needs a layout, and by default, it's going to use the default layout, which is not the one we want.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a lazy person's way of making a meeting component, which I decided not to do. There is one particular key in here, which is if you add one called content, then everything here is if it was the bottom half of that file. So everything else is front matter, and then the specific key of content is everything that would be below it. And for these meetings, I'm basically saying, hey, it's structured data. I don't want a content body because it's all in the metadata. So I'm just going to use a layout and do it that way. And then what we get is that blowing up because I had to load a Ruby file. And this is probably going to make me kill the file again. Oh, we're good. Sweet. But what this gets us is, oh, and now we've got, this also added, I also, as part of this, added in a meetings.html file, which is a top level meetings file that's going to list all of the meetings that we have. So this loops over, and now remember, we created resources with that plugin. So now meetings is now a collection because it's now a list of, it's in the meetings resources that we just created. So what this now gives us is top level meetings with each one of these being one of the meetings. And then now we've got a file, which is today's meeting and all of the metadata about it. And then I didn't have time to say, let's make a page for every talk. But you can see how it would go, because we've got all the talks as a YAML file. We've got all the people as a YAML file. So based on all of this, we could move to the next step of saying, okay, I'm going to create, the other thing I could do in here is like, okay, once we have the videos for this, we can link in, we could put in the YouTube embedded iframe bit on this one page for this one meeting. And then, or each one of these talks, well, I have it linkable, but it doesn't go anywhere, it just links to itself. Each one of the talks could have its own page, which is the talk, the person, and then the video. And then it would also be a separate URL. And then what we would have is, because we've got the search plugin dialed in, all of those are now resources that have content available for the search plugin, and they're all their own individual pages too, so they're all individually addressable, and so the SEO on them could hit pretty good too. And then, you know, this was kind of fun to figure out, and then because these are also using those resources, we've got all this stuff. And then we get to, hey, now it's time to deploy it. So deployment is built in to all of this. They already have stuff to build to deploy it to Netlify, Render, Vercel, rsync it, GitLab, GitHub, Docker. I personally like Netlify, and this is all you have to do. And you don't even have to edit either of those files.
You need Netflix, right?
Yeah, Netflix. We want to deploy it to Netflix, and it'll be available as a top 10 movie coming out next week.
It's gonna be trending.
So in particular, this right here, these are basically, I'd actually never used a netlify.toml file before, but if you put that in your repo, Netlify will look for a netlify.toml file and load all of its configuration for the site from that toml file. So you don't actually have to go through the UI and say, oh, set this environment variable, set this kind of stuff. It just is all already built in there.
And so Bridgetown's writes that file in a way that says, hey, this is my build command or
Yeah,
whatever.
here, actually, we'll just do it real quick. Oh, I had to change that one to true. That's what it was.
I just reset it.
Yeah, I just do it this way. All right. So now we can say, this is their config. Like, here's your run, deploy, and netlify.sh. And this is specifically for Netlify because it needs to set an environment variable for Netlify and that kind of stuff. But, you know, here's your, this is the published directory for Netlify. It says, what directory should I look for stuff? The important one here is actually Bridgetown ENV production is needed when you do your build so that it actually properly builds all the JavaScript and puts it in the right location. But then the other thing down here that you can do with Netlify is you can set top level CDN headers, which you may not do out of the box. And so this is like, you know, caching information, all sorts of different things like that. And go from there. And then what you end up with is when you go to Netlify, if this is a Git repo, then it's already wired up. You just go to Netlify, click Add New Site, import my GitHub repo because it's already got this netlify.toml file in it. Hit the Save button, and it auto deploys.
And then it watches for new commits, right?
And then it automatically goes in. And so that I already did that. So here, oh, not that one. So I deployed this to Netlify. I mean, it's not anything, but it is a Netlify app. And so this is all of that on Netlify. So yeah, here's the presenting one, which is an MD and like, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Robots.txt to that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Do not.
Robots.txt, and I mean, this has been up for like an hour now. I'm totally going to tear it down as soon as this is over.
people start going to your site like, what's this? This looks
Yeah.
official.
So there's a lot of areas I didn't cover. So any questions so far? Does it intrigue you? Looks kind of fun. I mean, especially once the thing that sort of blew me away at the end was like, oh, I can just, the plugin and writing code that's part of the internal API that's documented and how to do stuff is just like bonkers good. Things I didn't cover, lifecycle hooks, but all the lifecycle hooks are in the documentation and what you can do. Fetching remote content. So a lot of people might use a static site generator with some sort of back-end headless CMS thing like Dado CMS or Netlify Forms, or what's the one that, Contentful, and there's one that starts with an S too. I forget which one it is, but as part of this, they have examples of saying, hey, when you boot up, maybe you want to go out to some site and scrape some data that you've got. So like Dado CMS, you want to pull down all your people or something along those lines. And, then you basically do the same thing that we did here. Instead of loading it from a source data, you basically go out, grab a whole bunch of data, download it, and then you loop over it and make resources out of it.
Before you build?
As part of the build. It's part of the build. You could do other things where you could say, hey, I'm going to ping, I might like keep a local copy in the repo or, that kind of stuff. And then just need to refresh the data and that kind of stuff from an external source. But you can manage that however you'd like to. Server-side rendering. So now that Bridgetown has a whole, you can do dynamic stuff with it. So you could deploy it to say Heroku or, Fly.io as a very small web application too, where you just maybe had, 90% of your site is static. Let's say you do have one of these headless CMSs and you're updating data somewhere else and it needs to fetch a piece of data if it doesn't exist. Then you might put something out there. Dynamic routes, same thing. So you add a new person to system and it'll automatically go look it up. React components, it should just work, but I haven't played with it at all. And there we are. So questions, thoughts?
The Boulder, Rocky Mountain Ruby site I built in Bridgetown because Jeremy's been talking to me about Bridgetown for months.
Yeah.
And it's actually GitHub pages, and it was just as easy. I dropped in a GitHub page plugin, and as soon as I put it, which sets up a GitHub action, and as soon as I push, it just deploys it.
Oh yeah, because a lot of these plugins, all they do is generate code in your repo, and if you put in a .github/action/file, it just automatically goes and will execute on your next item. So yeah, that works great too. And I think GitLab is very similar. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, quick question. So I'm quite familiar with Middleman, and so I was trying to take a look at the site and how it compares to Jekyll. Jekyll was pretty awful. It's pretty awful. So I get the iteration from Jekyll. But I'm curious, is there anything published on Bridgetown as comparison documentation between the different engines? Because this seems extremely close to what Middleman does, with a few exceptions of the plugin architecture. And I'm trying to determine, I always try to steel man new applications as to why you wouldn't use this versus another solution. Something because there's plenty in the JavaScript community that do hook up to contentful APIs and do things in real time, to replace WordPress, for example. Yeah. That's usually one of the struggle points you have with this. And I just curious about your thoughts there and different things like that.
In terms of comparing it to Middleman, I think it's basically just the next level of stuff, because it's got the full hook system, and it's very well documented on where to do things. And actually probably the bigger one is maybe some of the new dynamic routes, and actually the integration with your front end stacks.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
It's out of the box. You don't have to worry about your front end stack and running Webpack or ESBuild or something alongside Middleman. This handles it for you out of the box.
Cool. Yeah, that's one of the things I was noticing. I mean, it's definitely a little bit more robust. It depends on the level of complexity you're looking for. I think from what I'm seeing. But is there an option? So one of the things I've run into with the WordPress, not to throw up WordPress, but as a comparison, is there, let's say you were to host this and you have a dynamic, you want to hook it up to something like Contentful, so where you have your editors that are publishing the blog pieces or whatever their piece of content on that platform, but you don't want to deal with hosting an engine. You just want it completely flat. So let's say you're deploying to S3 using CloudFront or something, and it's completely static, but you don't want to touch it, right? So you basically might have that piece of your business outsourced.
Yeah, so for those types of things, where you've got Contentful or Data CMS or something like that, it's basically, the big one is it's slowly changing data. So like if the data is changing every hour or so, well, even every hour would probably be just fine. I mean, this thing built in like 4 seconds, so, or less. You would probably want to wire into, say, the webhook section of those, so that like if somebody updated Contentful, maybe it fired an event to GitHub or something like that to trigger to GitHub action. And then the GitHub action would run the build, which would then download the data from Contentful as part of the build, and then automatically redeployed it. Something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a similar comparison. I have one more last question. I'm sorry. So one of the things I've noticed within Middleman and the Ruby paradigm versus, like, I'm not sure if you are familiar with Assemble.io, like the node variation of this. Okay. As a certain size point, it appears like you could benefit concurrency in Node, right? Yep. So you could spin up multiple build runners at the same time. So that when you're talking about a site that might have like 1,000 pages, this is where something like Middleman or Jekyll, the variations in Ruby, would really start to just take a considerable amount of time to regenerate all of those pieces of static content. Without being able to split up like sections of the app. So like, and that's one thing I noticed in some of the JavaScript variations and I think Go has Hugo is the Go variation that it does that where it splits it up. And I was wondering if Bridgetown has something like that baked in, or if that's possible or something like that. That's, I don't know. I'm just curious.
I haven't actually looked at that, but I think you probably could, because the whole build life cycle is documented as a hook. Okay. So there may be a top level hook that's like triggering the build, and you could put in a spawner that would then do it. Actually don't know off the top of my head, because the whole pipeline bits are. I think you probably could. Where's all the hooks?
It's an interesting problem for anybody who's dealt with this from like a CMS, or even like, let's say you're publishing all your sales pages like that, and you need to update different sections. Like, that's one thing I noticed in the past life. Like, you edit the header, and the header's got to update on 1,000 pages. Like, it could take hours to get all the content out.
Yeah, and that's what we did with the old that PHP one I did years ago. Yeah. Was basically, it actually, it was doing it in a serial fashion, and so it would take literally 20 hours to generate all of the data, and it was generated once a day. So it takes a long time. Yeah, so basically, I had a whole back-end parallel system that would like go through all the resources and spawn it out, and and we brought it down to like under an hour, 30 minutes to generate the entire day's worth of data, and also be good about like only generating the stuff that wasn't changed and that kind of stuff. So that's another thing. I haven't actually looked at that particular problem, but this is totally a thing. I would click on this community tab right here and look at like, they're using the discussion boards on GitHub, and they have a Discord, which are two areas of community like communication that I normally don't use for a lot of stuff. But that would be totally a place I would ask there. Actually, we could go look.
Their Discord's real active.
Is it? Oh, awesome. Yeah. How about we just do here and say.
Thank you for answering those. Thank you.
There's nothing in here, but I would totally pop into the Discord and see. I haven't joined the Discord. Concurrent maybe. Or maybe it's not open.
Yeah, it's probably parallel or concurrency. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it's not just a Ruby paradigm. A lot of the generators have the same problem. Like they all have the same challenge. Yeah. Yeah.
Every single one of them is going to have the same problem.
Yep.
So like, say you were Amazon and wanted to generate all your static content for every, which is a totally reasonable thing to do, by the way. If you got the product page and you don't have all the dynamic stuff, it doesn't change more than all that often. And they probably actually do under the covers a fair bit. That's one of the things you would totally look at. Yeah, so making it parallel, totally reasonable thing to do. And there may be a plugin for it, but I haven't looked. So
thank you.
You should investigate and drop a note in the Ruby channel. See if you find anything.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? No?
This is like going back to my roots back in 95 and 96.
Mm-hmm.
generating member directories for private organizations, like team organizations. And that's how we did it back then. C and C++ and
Yeah.
Perl and stuff like that. Just generate a big static site every day, every night.
Yep.
If you made a big change, you just do it right there.
Yep. Oh, and actually, this I just realized I answered my own React component question because this site is also a Bridgetown site, and this is a reveal.js React component. So on this particular, for this particular website, the page, there's only one. And I wrote a component called deck, which looks for the collection slides. And slides is just a bunch of HTML pages which is the reveal.js section, like top level. I thought about doing individual files per slide, but that turned out to be too unmanageable. So I was like, I'll just do it in big groups. And so this is all the reveal.js code, but it's available as a slides component or slides collection. And so that's the deck component. And we go to the components deck, and this is what it does is loads it all up, gets that collection out, filters them by order. So each one of those, if I wanted to reorder larger sections, I could just change the order in the front matter and it would reorder a bunch of slides. And then this just returns all the slides. And then in the deck.rb, oh, that's the one I just looked at, the ERB file. This is reveal syntax. So basically wrap it in reveal, wrap it in slides, and then each one of the slides just dumps in its content, which is basically a pass through. So it's going to dump in all the section bits about 4 times, one for each of the big items. But then the top level layout is, because it is just the body, and then the actual React component is part of, no, front end. JavaScript index. I basically said, hey, import my reveal bit, and that's all I did. And the reveal I just imported as I did npm install or yarn add reveal for this presentation, and then just basically added this bit of code to pull in the appropriate theme and the source and the code theme that I wanted, and then pulled in these other sub things that are necessary, initialized reveal, and then because it's initialized as part of the top head matter of the actual website, it then parses the body and then redraws the whole thing. So there you go. That's the whole website. Oh yeah. Cool. Thanks.